there's an outline here. We're going to look at our 2022 outlook. This is where we always start with our budget, because a budget is a prediction and we have to try to predict what we're going to be facing. We're going to talk about the COVID pandemic and the implications, then get into the budget itself, speak a bit about the new proposal for the environmental levy. I'll mention property assessments. They're not directly related to taxes, but everyone is always very interested in what's going on with the property assessments. So I'll speak about those, what's happened this year with property assessments in West Van and the relationship to the taxes. Then I'll get into some information on the actual property taxes and our next steps. So our 2022 outlook, we have our ongoing challenges that we always have, which is that West Vancouver has no industry. One thing I always like to let the public know when I get an opportunity to speak to this is that most of the communities in the Lower Mainland have a very heavy subsidy of property taxes from industrial property. In the city of North Vancouver, where I happen to be right now, it's up to 35% of the taxes are paid by the industrial tax base. And that means the residential tax base doesn't have to pay that. So in West Vancouver, there is no industry. So that means that all costs fall onto the pretty well, because we keep the business taxes as low as possible. All costs pretty well fall onto the residential properties. And that's, of course, the reason that West Vancouver, everyone loves to live in West Vancouver because it's so beautiful, but it does have this implication for property taxes. Also, there's minimal cash reserves available for major projects in West Vancouver because there's very low levels of development. You look around the Lower Mainland and you see all kinds of, museums and recreation centers and all sorts of things are being built in different communities, for instance, in the city of Burnaby and so on. But also, if you look around, you'll see that there are giant high rises being built. And those high rises contribute to all of that. So, in order, when West Vancouver does not have that level of development, they also don't have those levels of developer contributions to pay for these things. So comparing West Vancouver to other communities is a little bit tricky. We rely heavily on building permit fees. There are substantial building permit fees here, mostly from single detached dwelling development. And then our geography gives us a challenge in terms of maintaining infrastructure because it's built, we are on the side of a mountain, we have extensive foreshore, there's many trees in West Vancouver, all of which again contributes to the wonderful atmosphere here, but it is a challenging place to deliver municipal services. Specifically for 2022, we've got, we were all hoping to be done with COVID, and if you think back to last July, you realize that, Dr. Henry was being very optimistic and saying we could plan for phase 4, and we were talking about opening everything up again, and then bang, we got hit with Delta. No sooner did we seem to sort of manage to get through Delta when we got hit with Omicron, and now we're still in the midst of that. And unfortunately, although again, we're quite hopeful that we're going to get through this, no one knows really what's going to happen next. So we've learned to be very suspicious about getting rid of COVID because it doesn't even seem like it may be possible. But in addition to COVID, we've also been facing what I would call natural disasters. And we lost our entire supply chain at one point. And the Lower Mainland was actually cut off from the rest of the world, pretty much, in many respects. And gradually, again, we're recovering from that, but we're seeing all kinds of shortages in services and materials. And it's going to take a very long time for all of those things to stabilize. And whether the prices that we're seeing for various things ever do go down again is anybody's guess. We've had to significantly reduce our capital investment in spite of building up our asset levy. Thank goodness we had the asset levy because it gave us something to rely on, because our other sources of funding for investing in asset maintenance were severely reduced through trying to balance the COVID budgets. And then we have impacts of climate change. We all remember that we had a heat dome, followed by an atmospheric rivers, followed by terrible storm damage and snow and freezing rain. And each time one of these things happens, the municipality, of course, pivots immediately to respond and do our best. But we do believe that we cannot discount, we can't treat these as just extraordinary one-time events. We need to plan for how we're going to respond to this new world. In terms of the COVID pandemic right now, our public health order ordering on gatherings and events was recently updated. These public health orders on gathering and events mainly affect community services. Community services either can open its fitness centers and gyms, can hold classes, can have people coming together, or they cannot. So, it's really, we're trying to predict what is going to happen. Right now, we are, the fitness centers are open on a limited basis. And classes are proceeding on a limited basis. And as the weather hopefully gets better and we're able to hold more classes outside and so on, hopefully participation is going to come back. But I mean, this has really impacted participation. People, and rightly so, have been advised not to go out, not to gather. And so we've seen declines in participation, and we've had to adjust our budget for that. We've adjusted expenditures, of course, also. As we adjusted the revenues, we've adjusted the expenditures, but there are some expenditures that are very difficult to adjust. Even if, for instance, we closed down the pool, which we have not done, but suppose we did it, we would still have costs to keep maintaining that pool, because if you actually completely shut the pool down and drain it, it's very expensive to bring it back. So we have made adjustments as best we can. Particularly in the public safety area, we've been very carefully monitoring what's happening with the staff, because if we have there's a certain amount of coverage with fire and police in particular that we must provide. So we have a number of strategies in place to make sure that we are able to provide those staff on the ground. In areas where we do not have to have staff actually physically present, we've got as many staff as possible working from home. Again, because we've been advised not to gather and not to come together. And so far we've been fortunate, I think, in that we have not had. I mean, Dr. Henry was predicting maybe 30% loss of staff at some points, but we have not seen that. So, and hopefully things are starting to ease off a little bit now. So, we believe that all the measures that we've put in place and all the things that we're doing to be extremely careful are going to help us get through this. So in terms of the budget, this is a minimum spending budget. I mean, we're well aware that we're into the second year of COVID. I believe today is the anniversary, happy anniversary, of the first case of COVID in Canada. We're into this, we've had 2 years of this, and we're going into the third year, and it's affecting everyone, and we have to be as careful as possible. At the same time, we have to continue to deliver the services because they're very key for the community. So we want to maintain existing services within our financial constraints. So the only things that we have put in terms of increases are what we would call uncontrollable costs. We have collective agreements in place, which have increases built into them. Those are obligations that have already been entered into. We have contractual obligations with services, for instance, like Ecom that supplies radio services. We have dispatch services that we have an obligation to fund, and so on. So only where those kinds of costs are already existing and we cannot reduce them have we put the increases in. And then we have externally driven cost increases, like for energy, for instance. Energy costs, particularly for gasoline, very expensive. Although we can manage our consumption, there's a point, below which we cannot go. So we have to increase those budgets. Wherever we can attain efficiencies or prevent cost increase, I believe we have done that. And, we have many thousands of lines in the city budget in all our various areas. And finance and finance staff go over each and every one of them. We have business managers in the departments who are charged with working with us to manage the costs in their areas. And it's a very challenging job, because managing costs, for instance, in the police department and managing costs in the planning department are two totally different things. The district is in about 55 lines of business. And so it's challenging to control these costs, but we are doing our absolute best. I'll give you one example. For instance, in the technology area, we have significantly reduced the amount of paper that we're using, and therefore the amount of printers and photocopiers that we require. And we believe that even this year, we were able to take about $80,000 in costs out of our budget because of that. So we're looking at everything. In terms of our recovery, the community services programs are being restarted, and you can see that in the numbers. That's a very significant revenue, fees and charges increase for us, but also, of course, offsetting expenditures that relate to that. And we are trying to restore the service levels that were trimmed in the 2020 to 2021 budgets. These mainly have to do with asset maintenance investment. And again, this is something that we felt was necessary to do in order to keep operations going, but that we're trying to replenish that capital investment. But we can't do it all at once. And we haven't put in any new programs except one, which is to comply with a piece of provincial legislation that was passed in the fall. Why the province felt it was necessary to do this at this time, I don't know, but they passed amendments to the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act, such that we are required to hire expertise to help us review all of our records and complete what is called privacy impact analyses. And that's a very good thing. I'm not saying that's not a good thing, but it's an expense that might have not happened right now, but we have no choice about it. In terms of community services, when we had to close the gyms and fitness centers, we lost about $250K in revenue over what we were projecting, but we are, we had projected that we would be open in 2022. So we've had a short closure, and we're hoping that that's all we're going to have. And we've offset some of that funding by using what we call our contingency reserve. Through this whole COVID situation, we've been managing with a COVID fund. We collapsed a lot of other budgets into the COVID fund. And so we've been using this to respond to the pandemic and the costs that it's imposing. But the other thing that happened in community services is we had built in an anticipated increase in patrons or usage based on the fact that the Harry Jerome Recreation Center in the city of North Vancouver was due to close down. The last time that happened with the previous recreation center in North Vancouver, we had a lot of people who came from North Vancouver to West Vancouver to use the facility. It was a definite noticeable spike. However, the city of North Vancouver has changed its mind and is going to keep the Harry Jerome Recreation Center open. For reasons that are good and valid for them. But what that means is that for West Van, we can't count on the increased use. The other one thing that we have put into the budget is an additional $50,000 for hazard trees assessment. And that is because it has become clear that through the heat dome and the effects of the rain, the severe rainstorms that we've had, the trees need to be carefully looked at and assessed. And so we have 2 arborists on staff. They are unbelievably busy and they're doing their absolute best. So we're hoping that, we can meet this need. These numbers are pretty small, I'm sure, for everyone to look at, but basically it's the number at the bottom of the page. 1.79%, that is our operating tax rate increased request, 1.79%. It's well below the rate of inflation, and it takes into account all of the factors that I've just gone through. And you can see some of them highlighted in yellow above. Our revenue loss due to the PHO restrictions and so on, the use of our contingency reserve, the hazard tree assessments, and the fact that we've had to reduce once again our operating contribution to capital. We were trying to build that up. We had hoped to build it up a little bit more. We've had to back off on that a little bit. Let's see, moving forward. So again, this is kind of a repeat again of what I just went over. Again, coming down to the 1.79%. And in addition to the 1.79%, we are proposing a 1% increase to the asset levy. This is a program we've been on for about 5 years to build up a dedicated source of funds for asset maintenance and investment. And many other communities have been doing this for 15 or 20 years because was a strong recognition that prior to about 15 years ago, asset maintenance was getting no attention whatsoever. And we had a huge infrastructure deficit, not just in West Vancouver, but across Canada. Trying to address that is not a challenge that can be done in 1 year. I mean, this is something you have to build up to. We, again, as I say, had to reduce our contribution to capital. We did not reduce our asset levy. We reduced our contribution to capital, but we have to try to build that up again, and we have to. I strongly recommend that we continue on with the asset levy as well. So that even if we are successful in getting council and the public support to put this additional 1% in place, that will provide us with an asset levy of 10.3 million. We've got 2.1 million, which we've managed to. We used to have 7 million. When I say we had to drastically reduce, I'm not kidding. We used to have 7 million in 2019. When COVID hit, we had to reduce that to 0.7 million. Now we're trying to build that up again. We haven't, we had it at about 2.4. I think we had to reduce it to 2.1. But even with this asset levy, we're still about $4 million short of where we estimate we need to be to maintain the current suite of assets that we have. And unfortunately, with inflation running the way it is, especially on the construction side, that 4 million is probably an understatement. But I mean, that's the best number we have right now. So we really believe in this asset levy program and are recommending it. Our current capital budget is 17.8 million. This just shows, what the various things are that we would be using it for. There will be a lot more detail on this when the capital budget is presented in March. And these are our sources of funds. So, I mean, it's not just the asset levy or the operating budget contribution. We're using every source of funds that is available to us to build this up and to make our capital budget fundable. Environmental levy. The other thing that we're proposing this year is a 1% environmental levy. This would be a new levy. We're just about to fill the position of the environmental manager. I think the correct title is actually manager of climate adaptation and then the environment. Sorry, I'm not, that may not be right. But that manager will coordinate our overall strategy in response to all of these environmental impacts that we've been having. We all know that we have to reduce our GHG emissions. We have to change the way we're looking at things and change the way we're doing things. And this really needs to take place through all levels of the organization and indeed through all levels of the community and indeed through basically throughout the world. So we're wanting to do what we can here in West Vancouver to put West Vancouver in the forefront of responding to the climate change and other environmental challenges. And we believe that this environmental levy is key to that, because that manager will be coming forward with strategies and to try and fill in blanks in our information that we need in order to do this, in order to protect and enhance our natural assets and work with them, and in order to respond to the climate crisis. We have some examples of possible projects. We don't allocating this money to specific projects at this point, because we think there's a discussion to be had with the new environmental manager, with council, and with the public about what the priorities are. I mean, we could use this for electric vehicle charging stations, or we could use it for incentive programs, or we could use it for shoreline protection works. And there's probably, each of you could probably add 15 or 20 other things here that could be done. And so we have to figure out what the priorities are, what the best use of these funds are. But there's no question that we have to begin making a response, and that response needs to be funded. So this environmental levy, I hope will get support. Property assessment. Property assessment relative to property taxes. There's been significant increases in property value assessments in West Vancouver this year. There's no question. I think the average increase has been around 19%. And in some areas, and I'll be showing a map in a minute, they're much higher than that. However, the thing to understand about the increase in property assessment is that that increase is used to distribute that 1.79% increase in taxes that I mentioned earlier. It is not used to directly calculate the taxes. What happens is that we have what is in British Columbia called a fair market value assessment system, and we have the BC Assessment Authority who's responsible for making those assessments, and they reevaluate the value of properties every year. And every year you get an assessment notice telling you what that value is. If the value of a particular property is lower than the average value in the taxing area, that taxes will shift off of that property. And if it is higher, taxes will shift onto that property. And the net result of that is that all properties that are valued at the same amount pay the same amount. And that is considered to be a fair system. The problem is it means things are moving around every year. So every year, I end up spending, and my staff, we try our best to explain this to everyone, because the impact of the tax rate increase that council passes is far smaller than the impact of this shifting. And in West Vancouver, where the shifts are so great, these impacts are high. They just really take over from anything else. And so the main determinant of the property tax is whether that particular property has shifted relative to others. This year, for the very first time, the property assessment notice actually acknowledges this effect. And if you look at your property, the assessment that was sent to you, up in the upper right-hand corner, you will see the average change for your jurisdiction and then the change for this property. In this particular one, this is a made-up one. But in this particular one, the average change for properties is 23%. This particular property is changed by only 16%. Taxes will shift off of this property onto other properties where, the average change is higher than 23%. So it's 19%. This for West Vancouver, the average change for all residential is 19%. For single detached dwellings, it's 19.4, and for stratus, it's 11%. The taxing area is actually all residential. So if you compare the value of a particular property that you might be interested in, perhaps your own or one that you're interested in, to 19%, that will tell you are taxes shifting on or off. Move forward. This is our heat map. We provide this every year. Of course, you can't really see it very well here, but it is available on the website. And on the website, you can actually hover over individual properties or individual neighborhoods and see what the value changes are for each property that you might be interested in. Here, though, you can actually see 30 to 40% change, which is well above the average of 19, which I just mentioned. All of these yellow properties. So you can see that there are certain neighborhoods where the properties have gone up more than 19%. And then these green properties would be between 20 and 30. Some of them might be just very tiny bit above 19, so there'd be a small shift. Some of them might be closer to 30%, so there would be a greater shift. And then all of the sort of gray, not the dark gray. The dark gray properties are things like Lighthouse Park, which are not taxable, but unfortunately you can't really tell those from the light blue. But the light blue in the neighborhoods, those ones are between 2 and 20%. Those ones will be lower. And just for comparison, this is last year's heat map. Last year, there was very little change. You can see it was between 0 and 10% for almost everything. There were a few properties that were green and went up more, but they were very little change. Now, in terms of why there was such a great increase, it has to do with actual properties that sold. Once a property sells, that by definition establishes a fair market value, and the assessment authority will look in the neighborhood where that property sold at comparable properties and will adjust accordingly. But and again, if a property owner is not satisfied with the assessment that they've been given, they should contact the assessment authority. There are appeal mechanisms available. So again, this is just, okay, this is related to the additional school tax. The additional school tax is a provincial program. Really, the District of West Vancouver has no control over it, but it applies to properties valued over $3 million, and not on the first $3 million of value, but on the portion of valued over $3 million. And we have 682 properties which didn't face this tax previously, but which have now gone over $3 million. So there is an effect from that. And there's also an effect, a further effect if the property goes over $4 million. So I just wanted to give the community a heads up that this additional school tax, which again, I'll just emphasize, the district has no control over this. This is provincial, but this will show up on certain tax bills. And in terms of the homeowner grant, there's a maximum value to which a homeowner grant would apply. And again, we have properties which have gone over that maximum. So there will be properties for which don't qualify for the homeowner, which used to, but don't qualify anymore. Excuse me. So the proposed levy is 3.79%, including the asset levy and then environmental levy. For a single family dwelling with an average assessment, which this year is $3.67 million, the proposed increase would be about $247, which is just about 3.79. The increase for the a strata, which is an average strata, is valued at 1.6 million, would be $109, which is considerably lower, and that is because the increase in single detached dwellings will cause taxes to shift off the stratas and onto the single detached dwellings. And we've tried to prepare a schedule here showing taxes and utilities combined. It's very difficult, really, because taxes are based on assessment, and water and sewer in West Vancouver are based on consumption. So the average home valued at 3.67 million, might not have the average water consumption, but let's just suppose that it did for some reason. This would be the total increased amount. So that would be $431, which I think I have calculated here. That's about 4.83%, which is a little higher than the tax rate increase by itself. And that is because the utility increases are higher. And one of the major reasons for that has to do with the North Shore wastewater treatment plant. But all utility costs are increasing at a rate above inflation. And those are actually set mostly regionally. So those are something we just simply have to accommodate. We've shown some options here. We could have an environmental levy of 0.5 instead of 1, which would bring us down to 3.29. We could also cut the asset levy to 2.79. And of course, there are other options, very easy to see what you could develop here. What I believe we would find it extremely difficult to do is to go below 1.79 in terms of the operational increase. So our next steps are to complete our public consultation and our forum, and to answer as many questions as possible. And then based on the feedback from the public, we would be revising the budget and presenting it to council on the 14th of February. And based on the direction they give us then, we would develop our 5-year financial plan bylaw and our capital funding appropriations list. And assuming that is supported, then on April 11th, we would go forward with our tax rates bylaw. But the tax mill rates are based on the assessment plus the agreed upon tax rate. So once we complete the process of getting the support for the tax rate increase, the rest of this follows.